"Cut the grass and put your junk in the spare room," shouted my beloved wife, leaving the house and slamming the door behind her. The woman turned stroppy. 5 minutes later, my 16-year-old daughter, Lacey, yelled, "I'm out of here," and left the same way her mother did. I shook my head, unable to believe my life had sunk so low. A wife who always complained no matter what I did, and a daughter who barely acknowledged my existence. If I had known years ago that it would be like this, I never would have gotten married. I met Cheryl when we were both 18. We dated, and just after I turned 21, we got married. I loved her, and she loved me as far as I could tell. A year later, she gave birth to Lacey. We didn't have a lot of money at the time, but we made do. I worked as an auto bodybuilder and have been doing that since I graduated high school. Over the years, as Lacey grew up and I made more money, our life got a little easier. We rented a house, but we had our own cars. Mine was a Land Rover Discovery. I bought it cheap as it needed bodywork repairs, and Cheryl drove an old Toyota Prius. Cheryl quit her job after Lacey was born and came back part-time when Lacey went to school. I worked 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. About a year ago, things started to get serious between us. I noticed that Cheryl started ordering me around more instead of asking me to do things. Before, she was always asking, "Could you do this?" Or "Would you look at that?" Now, it was a blatant demand with no decorum. I finished cutting the grass just as the rain started to drizzle, cleaned up the garden, and went into the house. After a quick coffee, I went to see what kind of junk Her Majesty had deigned to clean up in the spare room. In my opinion, everything was in order, but some papers needed to be sorted out. As I sat there sorting through the papers and bills, I knocked over a box folder, and its contents scattered across the floor. "Damn it," I muttered, as if I didn't have enough to do already. I picked up the papers and started putting them back into the folder. I still don't know what made me look, but among the papers were our medical records. Mine were pretty thin since I very rarely saw my family doctor, and Lacey's weren't as thick, considering she was only 16. Cheryl's chart, however, had a lot of entries, and I looked into it out of curiosity. But the one that caught my eye was that she had terminated a pregnancy 4 years ago. That was news to me. I didn't know she was pregnant. I took another look and checked Lacey's records again. If she hadn't told me about the pregnancy, I wondered what else she might be hiding from me. And then I noticed it. One single letter had turned my life upside down. Lacey's blood type was a positive. Cheryl and I were both O positive. Not only had Cheryl kept the pregnancy from me, but it turned out that I wasn't Lacey's biological father. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the blood types and the abortion record. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I still needed proof. A short time later, Cheryl came home and started moaning that the mall was crowded, but that she hadn't bought anything. I spent the evening tidying up the spare room so as not to disturb my wife and daughter. I told Cheryl I wasn't happy with Lacey's behavior, but she brushed me off. "She's 16, Kevin. They're going through a phase." Maybe so, but I deserve some respect from her. She talks to me like crap sometimes. "Okay, I'll talk to her later," Cheryl sighed. I knew she wouldn't say anything, but it was like Lacey was becoming a younger version of her mother. Things had gotten so bad in the house that I only talked to them when necessary. I don't know if Cheryl noticed the change in my attitude. If she did, she never talked about it. A few days later, I needed parts for a car I was working on. The local dealer had them but couldn't deliver them for a few hours. I got in the company van to go get them. On the way, I passed my house and saw a strange car in the driveway. I didn't know anyone who owned a shiny new Jaguar, and as far as I knew, neither did Cheryl. I parked the van and walked back to my house. I quietly entered and listened to see if there was any noise. I heard a sound. 2 people having sex. It was coming from upstairs. I crept up and saw someone getting into Cheryl, and she was encouraging him. Taking a few pictures on my phone, I quietly made my way downstairs and headed for the door. Then I noticed the asshole's jacket on the chair. I pulled out his wallet and found his driver's license. Looks like Mr. Jason Turnbull lived a few miles away. I also found some credit cards and a receipt for a blood donation that showed he had blood type A positive. I immediately thought of Lacey's blood type, I didn't know if he was her donor, but given the blood type, I figured it was likely. After replacing everything, I left the house and headed out to get the necessary parts for the car. When I saw them having fun, my first thought was to beat the crap out of the guy and throw them both out of the house. Then I realized if Cheryl had given up on us as a couple, what was the point of fighting for her? That night, I went and checked Jason Turnbull's house. His car wasn't there, but what I assumed was his wife's car sure was. Turnbull drove home, and the door was opened by a very beautiful and petite woman with a baby in her arms. I went into the pub to have a beer with my brother, Terry. He realized something was wrong, and I laid it out for him. What the hell are you going to do, Kev? If you're right, that means Cheryl has been cheating on you for years. I know, Terry, and that's what really hurts me. I thought we were doing well until recently. How freaking wrong I was. I'll make a decision in the next few days and let you know what I decide to do. At home, I tried to act like nothing was wrong. Cheryl and Lacey didn't seem to notice me, and I doubted they cared at all. The next day at work, I talked to Alan, my boss. I explained the situation and said I might need some time off, depending on what I decided to do. A couple of days later, I was driving by my house on my lunch break, and Turnbull's car was parked in front of the house. The second I realized what I was going to do, I told Alan I was leaving. As I was moving, I didn't know exactly when, but I gave him as much notice as possible. The next day, Alan called me into the office and explained that an acquaintance of his in Yorkshire was looking for an experienced body repairer. He offered to talk to him and see if we could agree on something that would suit us all. 30 minutes later, I was already on the phone with John. He said he'd take me on Alan's recommendation, and he just needed to know when I'd arrive. 10 days if you don't mind. I need to get things sorted out here before I leave. 10 days will be plenty, Kevin. I might even have a place for you to stay until you get things sorted out. I thanked him and hung up, thanked Alan, and went back to work. Cheryl and I didn't have much money, but since most of it belonged to me, I was going to take it all, no matter what. The following Wednesday, I left work, thanked Alan for his help, and, loading the tools into my Land Rover Discovery, headed home. Tomorrow was to be my last day. Cheryl was working on Thursday, and that was when I planned to move out. Thursday, I went to work as usual and waited for Cheryl and Lacey to leave the house. When they left, I went inside and packed my clothes in my suitcase and bag. My CDs and DVDs went in the box with all my other personal belongings, and my documents and passport were already in a folder in the spare room. I did one last check before leaving an envelope for Cheryl. It contained pictures of her and him and a note from me. Along with the note, I left my wedding ring. I'm gone, and I'm not coming back. I stopped at a service station to take a leak and get coffee, taking the opportunity to send Lacey a text message. I told her I would text her when I got to the place I was staying. Arriving in Wakefield, Yorkshire, just after 4 p.m., I found John's apartment and went in to see him. After a short chat, he introduced me to some other guys. One of them, a guy called Larry, helped me unload tools and put them away in the workshop. John said to follow him as he had a place for me to stay. After a while, we pulled up to a small cottage on a quiet road. John knocked on the door and waited for a woman to open it. Kevin, this is my niece, Louise. Louise, this is Kevin. We shook hands and walked inside. Louise said I could stay here as long as I needed. I could afford the amount she was demanding for rent, and we agreed. John left. I said I would see him in the morning. I brought my things from the car and put them in the room Louise had allowed me to use. As we had dinner that night, I realized that Louise was itching to ask me some questions. Go ahead and ask. You probably want to know how I ended up here, I said with a smirk. She nodded. I was wondering, I just didn't know how to ask. I sat back and told Louise all about me and Cheryl. To her credit, she listened and never once said I was wrong in my actions. Wow, I can't believe you just walked away. I don't blame you, but it must have been hard to do. When I recounted the way things were and the disrespect I was getting from Lacey, she nodded and agreed with my reasoning. My Uncle John is a decent man and a good judge of character. Whatever your old boss said must be good. Have you met any of his employees? A few people. One big guy named Larry helped me unload toolboxes. Larry is my older brother. He looks a lot like John. I smiled, thinking it was a warning to be on my best behavior. The next day, when I turned on my cell phone, it just went berserk. There were texts and messages from Cheryl. I deleted them and went through the voicemails. At first, they were angrily calling me names, and then she was begging me to come home. I deleted them all and went to work. Mid-morning, I got a call from my brother. Terry? Hey, Kev, how's it going? Not bad, Terry. I've got a job and a place to stay. That's good, but you better stay there, at least for the foreseeable future. Cheryl's mad at you. She's telling everyone you're an unscrupulous bastard for leaving. Jason Turnbull is looking for you too. What does he want? Apparently, someone sent his wife a picture of him and Cheryl in bed, and she kicked him out of the house. Got what he deserved. It's true. Cheryl called me 3 times asking where you were. I told her I didn't know. Thanks, Terry. I appreciate that. When I get settled here, I'll text you my address. I have to go since I'm at work. I'll see you soon. I hung up the phone and smiled at the thought of Cheryl trying to find me. In the evening, I used Louise's laptop to send Lacey an email detailing why I had left. I told her that if she didn't believe me, she should ask her mother or look at the medical records upstairs. 2 days later, I received a reply from Lacey. She apologized and said she and her mom had been arguing about it for hours. Cheryl was still trying to blame it on me. I had been in Wakefield for over 2 months, and things were going well. Louise liked having someone around, and I was fine with that. During our conversations, Louise told me that she was divorced. Her ex-husband had run off with her so-called best friend. I started dating Louise on a social basis. She introduced me to her friends, and we all got along quite happily. One evening, she asked me if I was homesick. Honestly, until you brought it up, I hadn't given it much thought. Cheryl needs to realize that it's over between us. I'll wait until she files for divorce since I'm in no hurry. What makes you think that? Asked Louise. No reason. I just figured she'd sort out her lover and want to get married. I'll try and get you a date with one of my friends. Please don't, Louise. I just got out of a lousy marriage, and I don't think I'm ready for anything involving commitment right now. Louise smiled and nodded. From further conversations with her brother, it appeared that Turnbull had lost his wife, his job, and his car in the same week. He had worked for his father-in-law, who had fired him when he found out what had happened. Cheryl was now working full-time, and he and Lacey had moved into a small apartment to cut down on monthly expenses. Terry said that, as far as he knew, she was lonely and miserable as hell. Lacey spent as little time at home as possible, and when she was there, all she and Cheryl did was fight. When Christmas was almost here, I thought I'd give Louise a gift, just something from a friend, as a token of my appreciation. I had no idea what to get her, so I asked John for advice. I don't want to upset her, John, but I feel like I should get her something as a thank you for everything she's done for me. Jesus, Kevin, are you really that stupid? I'm sorry, John. I don't see where you're going with this. What she wants, you bloody idiot, is you. I know she likes having you around. I haven't seen her this happy in a long time. I smiled, nodded, and walked away. I liked Louise a lot, but I didn't know if we were both ready for a relationship. I think she was ready, I just wasn't sure of myself. I gave Louise a small necklace that I thought she would like, wrapped it up, and put it under the Christmas tree. On Christmas Eve, we sat down with our drinks to watch an old, corny movie. Never finishing it, we started making out and decided to take it to the bedroom. Neither of us had had sex in ages, but we definitely made up for it that night. After that night, we started living as a couple. Louise was a shapely girl. She had wide hips and a big bust. Her long, dark hair and gray eyes gave her face a beauty. At Christmas, we exchanged gifts and spent the day getting to know each other very intimately. Louise liked the necklace I gave her, and she chose a signet ring for me. On New Year's Eve, we attended a party, and Louise introduced me as her boyfriend. The screaming and yelling from her girlfriends was deafening. About bloody time, John laughed as he shook my hand. The following March was Terry's 40th birthday. He was throwing a party and I was expected to be there, or rather I was told to be there. Louise came with me. Everyone accepted that we were a couple and got on fine with Louise. Louise and I booked a room at a hotel not far from the house where Terry lived. I didn't want us to have to drag ourselves far that night if we were both drunk. The party was great, and almost everyone was drunk. When it was over, I said we'd call Sunday morning before we headed home. We staggered back to the hotel, both collapsed into bed, and fell asleep. When we entered the hotel restaurant for breakfast in the morning, I stopped dead in my tracks. "What happened?" whispered Louise. "That waitress over there." I pointed at her. "That's Cheryl." We sat down at a table, and I hoped someone else would serve us. No such luck, I realized as Cheryl approached our table. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" You're the last person I expected to see here." "Hello, Cheryl. You have a lot of nerve showing up here after all these years." "Who's that?" she asked, pointing at Louise. "Cheryl, this is my girlfriend, Louise." "Louise, this is Cheryl, my ex-wife." "Girlfriend? How long before you run away from her?" "He's not running off anywhere. I won't give him a reason to leave," replied Louise with a sly smirk. I almost choked, and Cheryl was at a loss for words. She stood there with her mouth open. "Don't forget that bigamy is illegal, Kevin. If you want to marry her, you'll have to divorce me first." "I assumed you'd divorce me as soon as I left. I had too many worries. Lacey was mad at you for leaving, and when she found out the reason, she took her anger out on me. We've barely spoken lately. Jason hasn't been any help. I couldn't even find him to get child support for Lacey." I smiled, knowing I was right on that point. "Cheryl, you can always get legal help and divorce me for abandoning your child. It's been over a year since I left. The divorce will go through pretty quickly. You, Kevin, you're gone, so you can file for divorce." Cheryl served us breakfast, and we left shortly afterward. I didn't say anything more to her. 2 weeks after we returned home to Wakefield, I filed for divorce, citing adultery as the reason and naming Jason Turnbull as the other party. Cheryl didn't fight back or ask for anything, and 6 months later, I received papers that the divorce was final. I never told Louise that I had filed for divorce from Cheryl. A few nights after receiving the final judgment, we were having dinner with John and his wife, Rachel. I got down on one knee and asked Louise to marry me. "Yes," she replied. Louise jumped up and hugged me. "It's a good thing you asked me because yesterday, I found out I was pregnant," she whispered in my ear. Epilogue. Louise and I got married before the baby was born, and since then we have had another child. We now have 2 boys who keep us busy. I found out through my brother that Cheryl was offered another job and left. The last time she was seen, she was still single. Lacey had married a soldier and was expecting her firstborn soon, but her relationship with Cheryl was still a bit strained. We have apologized to each other for our words and actions. Even though I am not her biological father, she said I am the only daddy she needs. Lacey wants to come visit when she has the baby, and Louise said she is always welcome. So far, no one has seen Jason Turnbull. The latest rumor is that he is broke and living in a dilapidated caravan somewhere on the South Coast, working any job he can find.